In a fast-moving market, you have to know what's working. You have to. With Nielsen and Intel, you'll know the wheres, the whens, the hows of advertising across industries and channels. Maximize your ROI. Why wouldn't you? And achieve better results. Stop guessing, start winning. Nielsen, Ad, Intel. Hey gang, it's Monday, September 29th. Rajiv, Beth, Ryan, and listeners, welcome to Behind the Numbers, new marketer video podcast made possible by Nielsen. I'm Marcus, and today I'm joined by three people. We have two of our senior health analysts, one living in New Jersey called Rajiv Leventhal. Welcome to the show.
Hey everyone, happy to be here.
Hey fella, and the other in Pennsylvania is Beth Snyder Bullock.
Hey, how are you?
Hello, hello. And we're also joined by special guest Ryan Sullivan, CMO of medication savings company GoodRx.
Delighted to be here, Marcus. Thanks for having me.
Of course. Thank you for hanging out. Well, whenever we have a special guest, we start with a speed intro. 60-ish seconds on the clock. We'll definitely run over that, and Stuart, who runs the team, will hate me for it, but who cares? Let's do it. Question one is just for Ryan. Who is GoodRx?
GoodRx is the leading medication savings platform in the US. We saved about 30 million consumers last year, a collective $17 billion on their prescriptions. And 90% of those people had insurance. So we're a complement to insurance, filling in the gaps the system doesn't cover.
I did a little homework. $85 billion saved, right? Since being founded?
That's correct.
That's almost impossible to wrap my head around, that much money's been saved in a decade and a half-ish. What do you do for them in a sentence?
I'm the CMO. I'd say that I lead a team that really takes and helps propel our business ambition, which is to continue growing that savings number further and further. And we distill our value proposition into some really precise messaging that invites people to trust and use our brand to save even more money. And that's what I do.
Okay. And finally, what's the best piece of advice you've ever received?
The best piece of advice I've ever received is probably have an opinion. If I'm invited somewhere or asked to come to a party, I should have an opinion.
Okay. I like that. Who was it from, may I ask?
Former manager of mine.
Okay. Very good. Beth, best piece of advice you've ever received?
When I walked into my son's fourth grade classroom, on the top of over the blackboard said, "You are responsible for you." And I'm not sure the teacher didn't give it to me. She was giving it to the whole class, but I was like, you know what? That's it, right? Take responsibility, and that's all you can be responsible for. So
yeah, that's terrific. Rajiv?
Yeah, probably not unique to just me, but I had a friend tell me once, stop worrying about what other people think. And once I was able to implement that, kind of outlook change, felt more relaxed, management day to day was a lot easier. So yeah.
Very nice. So I've got one for you, but Beth, you reminded me of another one. So I'm going to say mine first and then give you a bonus one quickly. So the one I heard recently was be the thermostat in the room, not the thermometer. Meaning, don't just passively react to what's going on and be affected by the people in the room. So if things are chaotic, don't let yourself react to the chaos and be influenced by that. You should be the thermostat so you can change the way you respond to folks so that you can bring the temperature down yourself and help calm those around you. So I really like that one. But Beth, you said walked into a classroom. It reminded me of one. I was in a bookstore in London, and this dad was with his daughter. She must have been, I don't know, 5, 6-ish, 7 maybe. And she picked up a book and she looked at the back, and then she looked at him and she said, "Dad, is this a children's book?" And he looked at her without missing a beat and said, "Anything's a children's book if you're brave enough." Awesome. And I wanted him to adopt me immediately. Such a good line. Amazing. Well, they're all fantastic pieces of advice. Today's topic, how GoodRx is helping consumers who are struggling with high drug prices and how their next campaign helps to tell that story. So, in a recent press release, Ryan, you guys, GoodRx, note that you are riding into a new creative territory with the launch of the Savings Wrangler, a groundbreaking brand campaign that aims to bring the company's mission to life in an unforgettable way, saying it's designed to deepen cultural relevance and brand resonance. The campaign introduces a lasso-wielding heroine, the Savings Wrangler, and a lovable, fiercely dedicated cowgirl who's on a mission to help Americans tame the Wild West of prescription pricing. So first question for you, chap, is why the Savings Wrangler campaign, and why now?
Yeah, the question around why Savings Wrangler? Well, we went through a whole process of really trying to study the brand that we've cultivated over since founding the company in 2011, and from that we identified a number of different things that we wanted to bring to life through a campaign. One of those was our archetype or persona, which is the fearless ally. That's a kind of an amalgam of a rebel, someone who really wants to kind of fight against injustice in the system, but also a heroic personality, someone who's really just trying to drive forward and make things better. And so we kind of meshed those together to get this idea of a fearless ally. So that's point one. Point two is when we think about the American prescription landscape and the costs of drugs, which are not getting less expensive over time, only more, they're in the unpredictability of pricing. You go to the pharmacy counter. We all grow up in the United States here, following parents or grandparents and seeing them take originally the piece of paper from the doctor to the pharmacy, and you kind of show up at the counter and you've got your fingers crossed, going, "Is my insurance got my back here? Is this a price I can afford?" And it's just it's somewhat irrational. It's unpredictable, and we thought the Wild West was a great analogy for that experience. And so when we blended the two together, we established this world of a Wild West analogy, and we put a heroine in the Wild West, the fearless ally, who we call the Savings Wrangler, and a trusty sidekick because, he's a lovable prairie dog named Dusty Pete, and we think he'd really add to brand salience. So that's kind of what got us there.
Yeah. There's almost too much research about how people are frustrated with drug prices. And you guys have done some yourself, GoodRx research. And there was this number that jumped out to me describing how people feel about them. 67%, so 2/3 of Americans who filled a prescription describe the cost of their medication as a burden. And so I think basically what you just said kind of encapsulates that perfectly. I found some other research from KFF saying 82% say the cost of prescription drugs is unreasonable. 82% is starting to get close to everybody at that point. It was interesting. I was reading a piece in the Medical Marketing and Media by, I'm going to mispronounce this, so my apologies, but Hiriya Rikaraj, and they were citing you as basically saying that introducing characters was important here as an effort to create deeper brand engagement. You were citing the piece saying that most healthcare marketing often looks quite similar, and so you wanted to break away from that and use characters to help create a narrative and a larger brand strategy at last. Tell us a bit more about that piece.
Yeah, I'd say that we've trained a generation of marketers that advertising has become a discipline awash in numbers and performance marketing tenants and digital platforms and channels. And I do think some of the more iconic elements that have propelled advertising for more than 100 years have been somewhat lost along the way. And so mascots, characters, we've seen research that says advertising is 90% more effective when incorporated. And if you think of healthcare advertising and the standard playbook of smiley, happy people or frowning people and walking in a field or birds chirping and then a drug name appears on the screen, we really wanted to cut through that noise and show up in a distinct and different way. And not only was the Fearless Ally a great way of showing up in this Western landscape, but we do think the mechanism adds to brand salience. And I'd add to that we didn't rebrand here. We have an amazing color. We've invested more than $1 billion in our brand since founding. And so we really wanted to add something new and another distinct element to really anchor our brand promise and be very memorable.
Yeah.
Ryan, I was just going to ask, you bring up like the kind of the prototypical drug ad, right, on TV, someone on the beach or dancing, and then a product, a medication appears. There's so many of them, and I think that drug ads work in maybe not the way that everyone would like them to work, but they drive consumers to ask their doctors about medications. When you're trying to cut through the noise and maybe differentiate, is it because we mentioned that people are so fed up with prescription drug prices? they really blame the pharmaceutical sector, the manufacturers of these products for that, and that leads to really poor reputations when you look at studies and polls of how consumers feel about drug companies. Did you just kind of want to steer clear of that, just knowing that you guys are not a pharmaceutical company, but how negatively a lot of people view that sector?
I would say that our approach was to look at the landscape as a whole, really, and consumers that show up to a pharmacy counter, or doctors and nurses, practitioners, and others in clinical settings that want a patient to get better, really want them to adhere and follow through on the treatment plan. And we have 1 billion prescriptions that are left at pharmacy counters in America every year because of a whole host of conspiring forces. And we show up in a way that's supposed to ease pressure and make it easy to use and save time and money. And so we really didn't want to get into and try to explain the complex world of healthcare in our advertising. I think that's kind of a recipe for more confusion in advertising when you get overly explanatory or try to do too much in 30 seconds. And so we really tried to keep it very simple and focused, and that's what really drove our decision making.
Mm-hmm.
And you mentioned you have 2 different characters, right? Not just one.
That's
Are you
right.
going to use them differently, or how does the one's a little sidekick, right? Dusty.
Yeah,
Is it-
it's definitely a little.
yeah. And will you use them differently in digital versus this is TV or video and connected TV?
So thankfully you asked that question. Absolutely. And, originally one of the things we decided was, should Dusty Pete, a prairie dog, talk? Should he have a voice? And we went back and forth on this. And one of the reasons we gave him a voice is because we wanted him to have his own presence in social media. And he actually sings songs, he plays the guitar, and takes some of our customer testimonials and familiar settings that people encounter in the prescription world and puts them to music. And audio works in many ways as another reinforcement mechanism for memory structure. And so absolutely, it was a distinct choice to have 2 and give him a voice and give him a distinct role in social while also being part of the video landscape.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like that you're using him in digital, you're using him, you say, in videos to tell real user stories.
That's right.
Which I think is really, really good. There's an element here of humor, but as we were talking before the recording, you were saying that there's an opening for levity in healthcare advertising.
Sure.
However, it's a balance because healthcare is very serious. How do you guys strike that balance?
Healthcare advertising follows the playbooks we talked about before for good reasons. If I were in the seat of some of the other leaders in the pharmaceutical industry, I might make some of the same decisions because there are good reasons to follow certain standards. In our case, humor, in addition to having mascots, is another way to improve recall. And we knew we wanted to, again, cut through and show up in a distinct and different way that reinforced memory and recall of our brand. And so we wanted to approach humor from a place where it was more tasteful, warm, charming, quirky, endearing. Those were the words that we shared with the creative team in the briefing process, not Super Bowl, beer commercial, knee slapping, or sophomore type humor, which has a place and a role for probably a different industry than ours. We want to be respectful of the real undercurrent or why someone is taking the medication they've been prescribed, and not be irreverent in that process.
You mentioned something else just a second ago, which was that you're also in the campaigns. The mascot. I forget his Pete.
Dusty Pete. Yep.
Dusty Pete.
This little guy over here. Yeah.
Oh, you have it. Oh, okay. There's merch.
Yeah, there's merch.
Yes,
There's
please.
merch.
Dusty Pete. So he's singing, and one of the things he sings is it saves you money, but it also saves you time. And I thought that was a really clever element to add, because for a lot of companies, they think of saving time as convenience. If you buy something, let's say from Amazon, you save money, and hopefully it's also conveniently delivered to you as fast as possible. But with healthcare, I don't really think of it. Maybe I should, but I don't think of it as convenient. I just know it as I spend so much time and waste so much time doing these things I don't feel like I should have to. And so I thought that was an interesting component to add, not just the money saving, the $85 billion to 17 of the last year, also the time piece.
Absolutely. And it was an acknowledgement too of the people we're reaching with this advertising. Marketing tends to get very channel or audience focused sometimes, and we kind of forget very simple things that when you buy television ads, it's not like everyone who is not your target customer, the end user of the product, turns off their brains and doesn't see it. So we were very aware that medical professionals, industry insiders, B2B partners are going to see these advertisements too. And for some of them, like a doctor, saving money is nice that they know that's happening for their patient. It makes it more likely that they will take the medication. But for them and prior authorizations and step therapies and all the things I'm sure that Beth and Rajiv have seen in data and stuff they've analyzed in the sector, saving time and getting time back for their practice is a really important part for them.
Mm-hmm.
And also anybody who wants to have digital convenience does it with an expectation that it's going to be digitally simple. That's the promise of technology that we've seen in most sectors. Healthcare's just lagged, and we're out front in that area as a leading brand.
So we've talked a bit about how confusing the healthcare space can be in the States and how you have to, I want to go around the horn on this one because I'm curious to what Rajiv and Beth are seeing in their research here as it pertains to healthcare marketing. But I'll start with you, Ryan. How do you balance advertising the company, what you're trying to help people do, what you're about, with the healthcare literacy piece? Because there is a certain element, it does feel like there's a certain level of education that kind of has to happen.
There is definitely education, and it's more a call to action to say, if you're going through the process of getting a prescription, just do yourself a favor and take a moment, check GoodRx, and make a plan. That's really what we're trying to say.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the expectation I think people, like I said, have in many other walks of life and the services that they engage with on and offline. In terms of healthcare literacy, we intentionally try to avoid jargon in our advertising. The fact that we call it a coupon is really meant to be an aid to consumers and use something very familiar. We use coupons to save on other products, use coupons to save on prescriptions. What our coupon really is routing instructions for the pharmacist to know how to adjudicate the transaction. That doesn't make for really compelling ad copy. So of course we avoid something like that. And a lot of little things like that. The intentional choice to be very focused on medication and prescriptions and not healthcare overall. And we really just try to emphasize the idea that you save time and money. The other part is we don't have to force everything that our brilliant product and development teams and design teams do at GoodRx into the ad. If we're successful and I'm doing my job well, it is an invitation for someone to check and change a behavior and ingrained behavior. And when they come to our product or our app, the simplicity of that really makes it unnecessary to have to be mired in all of the complex reimbursement mechanisms that drive the pricing that someone sees at the pharmacy counter. So that's how we think about it. But there are other areas in our articles and content we create that are much more focused and deep, where someone who really wants to learn more about their condition can read about it.
It's interesting because, as you noted, simplicity is usually best in messaging over complexity. But in healthcare, of course, it's kind of unavoidable. And even like a company like GoodRx, that's, of course, not like a provider or not like a hospital or a pharmaceutical company, but still has products and services that people might not be, a lot of people might not be educated on. Like, I've had people ask me, wait, what's the difference between GoodRx and insurance? Do I use this in place of insurance? Like, have you thought about, from a marketing perspective, how to, raise awareness of what your company primarily does without confusing people?
Absolutely. So there's a lot of examples of that, but I think one that's probably best is in the idea of great marketing to me does two things. It raises the awareness and it ingrains some sort of intent to take a brand seriously. And then the second thing it does is it makes sure that the brand shows up along the journey in sensible areas so that it's almost always just a click away. It's super easy to find and use when you need it. And one of the places we really focus a lot of our energy is in around the clinical setting. We send cards to doctors' offices, or the savings card itself, a physical piece of paper. And then we also educate doctors and office staffs. We've had field reps that have gone into offices. We have more than 1 million HCPs that actually use our tools themselves, our app, in the setting. And so we really want to make sure that they understand the GoodRx promise, because one, that is a highly trusted individual who's given us the nod that we're a legitimate and trustworthy company, and two, the patient's already there having a conversation about their treatment plan, and the doctor can make it simple and just say, look, a lot of my patients get a lot of benefit out of GoodRx for this particular medication, or if you pay out of pocket with cash, we don't have to do all this paperwork and jockeying with the insurance company, and it's going to be close to the same price. And so by focusing in and around the journey in sensible areas, we try to make it easy to use and understand without having, again, get into the weeds of how it works and lean into trust. That said, we do have resources on our website and FAQs that can answer any and every question a consumer has about how it works, how the savings come to be, why the prices change, and all that kind of stuff for those that are curious. But that's a minority of people.
Beth, how many surveys of HCPs have we seen where
Right.
they're asked what they want from pharmaceutical companies, and it's always the top answer is resources that will help my patients afford their medication. And that's clearly, as you noted, it's a big piece of this, not just like reaching consumers.
Mm-hmm.
That's absolutely right. They want nothing more than to have no problems whatsoever getting their patient on the therapy and staying on it. They do not want cost burdens. They don't want paperwork burdens. They want none of that. They want to be able to practice what they went to school for, which is not paperwork. Yeah.
There's so much interesting research here as well from yourselves, and I found some other stuff as well about how these drug prices affect people's behavior. One from you guys was paying for prescription drugs leads many Americans to make sacrifices in other areas of life. Almost 30% of people reporting cutting back on spending for food or clothing to pay for prescriptions. Another one from you guys, high out-of-pocket costs change how people take their medication. Among people who fill prescriptions this year, 20% report rationing their medications due to cost, and then over 30% from KFF, 30% of Americans say they aren't taking prescription medicine because of the cost. So I think you're just very different from other companies where you're uniquely positioned to say, we are, you're the Robin Hood, steal from the rich, help the poor, the superhero, the heroine, is very uniquely positioned where everything about your mission is to really help folks and help them in very meaningful ways. And I think this research really supports that. But still, Beth, there is, to what we've been saying, a certain amount of education needed. I think, Ryan, you mentioned this idea of a tutorial in an ad. Beth, what are your thoughts on this balancing act between, because healthcare is uniquely positioned where it is complicated, and trying to market a very complicated space can be more difficult than some other industries?
Yeah, I mean, I think I agree. Simplicity is key. You can't go too simple, right? Because people are confused. It's a complex system. They're not only talking to their doctor, they're not getting diagnosis, then they're talking to their pharmacist, and then they're trying to navigate the prescription, then they're trying to navigate the costs. I mean, there's so many different insurance, there's so many different pieces to it.
Mm-hmm.
So the simpler you can make your message right up front, and that sort of you can save money. I mean, I've used the app too. You're like, look, okay, how much is it going to be at the counter? I did want to ask though, like the pharmacists at the counter, they're also like when people bring that, do you have a relationship with them? You mentioned the doctors. Do you work with them as well?
We work with the pharmacy, the retailers themselves.
I meant the pharmacies. Sorry about that.
Yeah, no, that's fine. And both, honestly, our HCP communications, HCP is GoodRx language, speaking about trying to not to decomplicate things. It's just healthcare professional. It's the wrapper of everybody along the continuum. And so we do work on messaging for the whole channel, and pharmacists are a top referral source for GoodRx. They're right there and know that, which drugs are commonly going to create friction at the counter, and we try to make it easy. We've done things in the app that make what we call the coupon easier to see with a tap, so it blows it up and it's easy to use when they have to punch it in, and just try to do whatever we can to make it easier at the register for everybody involved.
Having those relationships with pharmacists and doctors, physicians, healthcare providers, I mean, those are all the ones that we see in survey after survey that are most trusted voices that patients trust. So to connect with them is really important.
Yeah, trust is the key word there. I think if you don't have trust, you have no choice but to get mired in complexity and jargon and lots of scientific research and papers. And there's a time and place for that validating. But we are a trusted brand. We've saved billions and billions of dollars for folks. We have very high NPS among healthcare professionals, and that really helps propel us into the position we are in the industry as the leading brand in the space.
So circling back to the Savings Wrangler campaign, which KPIs are going to matter most when measuring the effectiveness of this?
I have to practice what I preach, which is I don't believe any single one number is universally useful on its own. Numbers are a double-edged sword. And so we are looking at a lot of metrics across the top of the funnel all the way to the lower funnel, clicks, traffic, spikes in app downloads, all those types of things around ad area. And we have a very modern measurement infrastructure to just help us optimize and calibrate the program. In the mid to long run, what we're really looking for here is growth, sales lift and market penetration growth, and more people using GoodRx and responding to our advertising. And of course, we're going to look at aided and unaided awareness as a universal benchmark to continue to show that we're moving in the right direction.
Let's end by talking a bit about the future. And it doesn't have to be that far in the future. It could be the short-term future. But what new spaces is GoodRx focusing on? Why and how is this being baked into your marketing strategy?
So from a marketing and communications perspective, we made a lot of intentional choices with the Wrangler and the Wild West of prescription savings and our hassles that we're here to address. And that's a platform choice. It's one that we're going to stick with for the long haul. And so we'll continue to build around that and integrate new messaging, product marketing messaging into that fabric. And you'll see that coming from us. We've also leaned into certain things more recently. We're doing more with audio. There's speaking about things that might have fallen out of favor. I think the classic jingle and other things that kind of serve as memory structures. We continue to explore and experiment with things like that. The ballads that we call them, the Dusty Beat ballads, are an example of that. So you'll see more of that from us. And I think the last piece is more just setting ourselves up or continue to be set up for success in a future with decentralized brand discovery. If everybody in your podcast was waiting for me to say the word AI, now is the moment. So agentic tools, the agentic AI, just decentralized brand discovery. So we're doing more in the communication space with our content, our proprietary and unique data and research and insights to really just syndicate and show up in more places, to leave our fingerprints in more areas of the digital world, to make sure we show up strong and continue to be in the leadership position we're in the space.
GoodRx has definitely moved into some new markets of late. Of course, like prescription drug savings is the main area, but now consumers can go to the site and sign up for a subscription for ED medications, telehealth appointments. There's certain, I think, wellness, right, over-the-counter wellness products that GoodRx offers, like right on the platform. I mean, you have so many consumers going to your site, your platform every day, but right, like how you think about it from like a marketing is. People are going to be interested in different parts of your business. So you have the RX savings, but a completely different person might be interested in that subscription ED service or the over-the-counter birth control pill that now you can buy on GoodRx's marketplace. Like, how do you kind of think of like marketing to those different cohorts of consumers?
Yeah, we think about this in a kind of a classic flywheel sort of sense, in that you have to, if the end goal is to get a medication at a price you can afford, then we have to start there. And so where we have strength in leadership and pricing or solutions for consumers, that gives us permission to work our way out and go as far upstream as it makes sense to save a consumer time and money. And so, as you mentioned, we are taking the telemedicine offering that we've actually had acute telemedicine for quite some time, and it's been a part of our business that we really like, and we're now bundling those things together in a way that furthers the idea that you can save time and money with GoodRx by just reducing the number of steps and complications and trying to give consumers the options that modern connected telehealth or end-to-end telehealth kind of solutions in market don't necessarily provide, but maybe at a higher price than is necessary for the consumer in the long run. As far as marketing it, I'll go back to the point of being simple. We do product marketing, we do messaging and things around these specific campaigns and capabilities. But again, our product team is fantastic, and their ability to integrate those types of solutions into the fabric of our experience just allows us to get the next best action or something that makes sense for a consumer along their journey in their hand when it makes sense and they show up to save time and money on prescriptions. And so, yeah, we contemplated all of that when we developed this new campaign.
And you mentioned everybody was waiting for AI, but you forgot the other one everybody's waiting for, GLP-1s. You have a big deal there too.
We do, yeah. I think of that as it's an area of a lot of urgency in pricing is in GLP-1s just because of the popularity and the explosion. I think it's a consumer-oriented product in a medication, which is not always the case in healthcare. If I would say infrequently the case in the prescription drug industry. But and there's certainly better people than me to talk about the deeper aspects of these types of partnerships. But having the amazing price we do through the partnership with Novo for Wegovy and Ozempic is just another example of the leadership position we have in the space and a willingness and our role in really making it simple for consumers by partnering with everybody to bring great pricing to the market.
I can only imagine how many people have gone to GoodRx and typed in Ozempic or Zepbound trying to, not pay that $1,100 per month price. And there's definitely like a conversion angle there, right? With all of those searches happening.
Yeah, don't quote me on the exact number, but I think when we looked at this last year, if consumers just came to GoodRx, even prior to this particular partnership we have at Novo Nordisk, and used the savings implements we had, that they would have collectively saved something like $100 million on the prescriptions that had already been paid for out of pocket. And so the point is that, for those that don't have insurance coverage and were paying out of pocket, there was a lot of use of these medications for probably both indications. And if people just would have used our coupons, we would have saved them about $100 million, I think was the number that I recall.
And I would guess people are just coming there and searching for that too, as well, right? Like,
yeah,
can I save? How can I save?
Exactly. And we have content and articles on our website that specifically address that. We didn't talk about it extensively here, but GoodRx Health is another great resource we use to expand our surface area in all channels and in traditional vehicles like organic search and other areas where people discover. But it's also a great way for us to get engagement socially because the types of things that are shared along social channels tend to be content and articles, and health content is some of the more popular things that are shared in social media. I think specifically, almost 17 million people came to GoodRx looking for savings in GLP-1 medications last year, and that was a 22% increase from the year prior. So, there's a lot of demand on our platform for these and all the other popular medications out there that consumers are trying to learn more about and try to save time and money. Mm-hmm. And not just consumers, HCPs as well.
Yeah. Ryan, I have about 10,000 more questions for you, but unfortunately, that's all we've got time for. Thank you so much to my guests for hanging out with me today. Thank you first to Rajiv.
Yeah, thank you. Had a great time.
And to Beth.
Thank you. Great to be here.
And thank you to Ryan.
Thank you, Marcus, Beth, and Rajiv. It was great.
Yes, indeed. And thank you to the whole editing crew and to everyone for listening in to Behind the Numbers, an e-marketer video podcast made possible by Nielsen.